Are you planning on becoming a UI designer or want to be more senior in the field? Well, with this video, we will set you up for success and let you know exactly what to expect from the industry in the coming year. Hey, my name's Craig, and I'm a visual designer and UI mentor at CareerFoundry. And today, I'll cover all you need to know about the future of UI design, the trends, and where the industry is headed in 2023. So our first trend is going to be micro interactions. What are micro interactions? You're actually more familiar with them than you realize. They're things like swiping or scrolling. A button would be an example as well. So it's when the design and a user interact for a task or a purpose. They improve navigation, they create engagement, and are more likely to be shared or have repeat use by a user. One of the rules, there needs to be a trigger, there needs to be a rule, there needs to be feedback, and then it needs to loop in some way. So in this example, the trigger would be tapping this plus symbol. The rule would be that every time it does that, it rotates 45 degrees so that the button becomes an X. And the menu, it could fade on, it could slide on, any number of things. That part's not necessarily part of the rule. The feedback is that that worked and you have your menu up. And then the loop in this case is that you would click it again for the menu to disappear and for the button to turn back to a plus. Not all micro interactions require you to do something to loop. They could be automatic, but in the case of a menu such as this, you would actually want to be the one in charge of that. So here we have a selection of animated GIFs showing some really neat micro interactions. Over here, we've got when the user clicks that arrow, it kind of shows that it's uploading, and then it actually even gives us that message at the end. That would be, and it loops itself. There's no reason for the user to do anything else. Here we've got a really fun little kind of daytime, nighttime, maybe light mode, dark mode illustration that goes from a sun to kind of that nighttime moon. And what we're going to see more of in 2023 is probably the ability to do these more creative and more dynamic animations for our micro interactions. With 5G and bandwidth and the software, we can do things with After Effects now that we've never been able to do before up until just a couple of years ago. There's just a lot more potential for animation in micro actions, so I think we will see more really exciting versions. Down here in the bottom left, we've got this just real simple little, you've got a notification. You kind of see that little red paper airplane fly in, and then the bell rings when you get the little red dot. And then this is just kind of a onboarding screen, and it's just fun. They've brought in full-on character animation, and as you kind of progress through the onboarding, the characters in fact do the things that you're doing. So really, really fun example of a micro interaction there. Why are they relevant to UI designers? As I was mentioning, screen resolution, connectivity speeds, users that are more tech savvy, all of those things are going to help us to leverage micro interactions, and you'll see probably more and more of them, much more dynamic. They're fun. It's a lot of fun after you've designed your user interface to then come up with ways that you can make it come to life with motion. And I really think we're kind of in the early days of micro interactions. And I think that examples like scrolling and tapping a button will become so obvious, and we'll have such new and creative ways of doing micro interactions. If you have an overabundance of micro interactions, it can be kind of frustrating to a user and could create less engagement. Just doing motion for the sake of motion. And so again, this one I think is a good example where perhaps having those icons kind of shift off to the side, the text come up. After a while, that could become kind of frustrating, and a user would be like, well, I know that's the home button. I know that's the settings button. I would prefer to just have it do what I'm asking. So that's micro interactions, trend number one. Let's go ahead and move on to trend number two, which is going to be a revolution in tools. What do I mean by that? It's kind of two parts. We have Sketch, Adobe XD, and Figma currently. Perhaps you've heard that Adobe acquired Figma. And I think that in the near future, 2023 for sure, is going to really revolutionize our workflow, kind of streamline it. We're going to have one less tool to learn, because I'm kind of assuming, based on the way that Adobe acquisitions have occurred in the past, that they will sort of merge the two, and we'll probably just have something called Adobe Figma. We'll get all awesome presentation and wireframing and prototyping capabilities of Figma, and some of the neat things that Adobe brings to the table as a design juggernaut, such as being part of the Creative Cloud and the seamless sort of connection between all of their other programs like Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, After Effects. And so that's not necessarily a tool, it's just a revolution in how much we maybe have to know as a UI designer. And I think that that's going to allow us some free space, some headspace to perhaps really get more into different online courses, play with open source assets, maybe even some code, and really allow someone to explore what really excites them. So maybe you can be a developer and dabble in 3D, or a UI designer and design your own custom typeface. I really like this vectory. Traditional 3D programs are incredible. They are just very difficult. I've dabbled with them, and generally speaking, I don't get very far. I played around with this one, and it seems much more intuitive and a little bit more, bare bones I don't want to say, but it works more the way that at least my brain works. And I was able to create a couple of really fun little things in a fairly short amount of time. So it's a nice way to explore 3D and perhaps implement that into your UI designs. Another thing that maybe you'd be interested in, it's certainly quite popular right now, is some hand lettering. I think with all the 3D that we just looked at, talk of the metaverse, the AI revolution in art and design, I do think that as humans, we always want to find that balance, and perhaps hand lettering, textures that feel like brush strokes or paper, those kinds of things you can bring into your work. And so it's not necessarily a tool, but it's an online course that you could perhaps take and find ways to implement something exciting like that in your design. Then once you have that, you could actually use glyphs if you wanted to very quickly, very easily. This is an amazing program I've been playing around with for about the last year. That is a type design. And so of course what they're showing here on their website is more traditional serif typeface and whatnot. But you could import whatever you did with hand lettering and code it to work on any website or app that you were working on. So glyphs is a really neat tool. All right, so that's trend 2, which is a revolution in tools. We're going to see a combination, most likely, of Adobe XD and Figma. There's going to be a little bit less to learn, so then we can use that time and headspace to learn new tools that interest us. I love this time right now. Like, if you have an interest or an itch, you should definitely scratch it. And there's a community there that can help you to learn things. Obviously, what are the risks? There's constantly evolving technology can for sure cause some anxiety, some fear that you don't know what you should know. I don't think you need to worry about being a jack of all trades and a master of none. Learn what you want and don't learn what you don't want. I do not really know how to do 3D, and I guess that could be a weak spot, but it's not, because I bring other aspects to the table like animation, bits of code. I can even do some illustration and typography. I do think the era of specialization is coming to an end, and that companies are looking for stars that can maybe design from a multitude of different ways. So again, maybe you bring a custom font to the table by using an app like Glyphs. So that's revolution in tools. That's trend number 2. Let's move on to wearable computers. And as the name would imply, they're computers that you wear. And we're familiar with them. You may even own one or two. So Fitbits and Apple Watches, etc., AR and VR headsets. I don't really want to focus too much on the technology here, but more on a UI designer's role and some of the aesthetics for designing with wearables in mind. So here, this example is some kind of fitness app. I'm assuming it's a jogging app based on the imagery that they've given us. The characteristics that I think define this are it's monochromatic, it's the black background, and everything else is yellow. So it's really easily viewable while running and being active. You've got a huge pause button so that they can pause it if they need be. Kind of shows an elevation change, it would appear, and a little map pointer. It's really clean, nice use of infographics and space to optimize a really small screen. And then I didn't want to just stick with the infographic style or very, very minimal clean, because this is a real app. I did not download this one, but I watched some videos on it, and you can create a custom avatar. And then I believe in order to see it functioning like this, you would still need a headset. But and then they can interact. You can sit and talk and text and whatnot. And it's kind of a fun character-based version of something for a wearable. So why is this relevant for UI designers? For better or worse, there's a lot of focus on this area of technology in the future. And if it interests you, it's certainly going to be a growth industry. I do think there's a lot of really cool design challenges that we can embrace. Maybe 10 years from now, we won't design so much for small rectangles, meaning our phones, and large rectangles, meaning our computers, but instead we'll spend our time designing for a multitude of dimensions and shapes for refrigerators or car dashboards, or who knows, maybe even our clothing, like a t-shirt might have a little smart window or something like that. So I think that there's just limitless solutions for us as designers. There might be some risks for health or battery life and heat dissipation or security, things like that. And I think as designers, it's important that we stay informed and help mitigate these issues if we see a place that we could, and just stay informed and focused on those kinds of projects and products. So trend 4 is one that's very important and near and dear to my heart, and it is designing with sustainability in mind. There are lots of definitions for what sustainability means. I like the succinct Wikipedia version, which is sustainability is the ability to exist constantly. For design, that means fulfilling current user and societal needs. We're not going to get rid of our devices or products, but not compromise the needs of future generations. It's a large subject, and I can, of course, only cover off on the very tip of the iceberg. But I would like to focus on how we can remind users of their own responsibility, how we can just seek out employment with companies that share those values with us, and how we can look for solutions in our work when it's appropriate that are eco-friendly and use less resources. So this is an example of how we could remind users of their own responsibility. I designed this little homepage, and it's for a company called EcoShop. So the idea would be that it's appropriate to have a prompt like this. This is a company whose audience is there for eco-friendliness, in theory. Again, it's a made-up company. And so I can create this little pop-up window, and as the user were to scroll down, perhaps this would then pop up. And I'm having some fun with the kind of language that I'm using. So it says, "Hey, fellow astronauts on Spaceship Earth, remember our videos do not autoplay, and when you proceed to checkout, you'll be prompted with a selection of similar products with shorter shipping distances." And then they could close that and continue shopping. Just a really nice, easy, succinct way of reminding them that they do have an impact and that their decisions can and will make a difference. Now, I mentioned seeking companies with similar values. I really like this one from New Belgium Brewery. Climate change is important to them, and they have worked to make Fat Tire, which is their kind of signature beer, the first certified carbon neutral beer in the US, and they're committing to making all their beers carbon neutral by 2030. That's a company that, if it's important to you, that you could seek out. There's Patagonia. Lego, I believe, by 2030 is looking to make all of their blocks from resources that can be regrown. So that's one way we can make a difference. But now I want to show you some of the resources that are available regardless of what company you're working for, and that you could always kind of have in your back pocket and show to prospective clients and really help them to understand their role as well. So the first one is Digital Beacon, and it calculates the environmental impact of a web page. And you type in the URL, you submit, and it gives you a full kind of readout of the CO2 emissions, page sizes, and gives you tips on how to optimize. Speaking of optimize, there's Short Pixel. So we're using these images, of course, and digitally we don't need quite as large as print, but oftentimes the files are still quite a bit bigger than they need to be. And that means that download times are more resource intensive. And there are great tools to compress those where you won't see any change in the visual quality, but it could have, or even more than have, the size of the final image. Then there's all kinds of little coding tricks, things like lazy loading, where the images and text only load as you scroll to them, and fonts, etc. So why is this relevant for UI designers? Honestly, there's no design on a dead planet, and I really think that we're seeing a large shift in the focus. And I think that we can absolutely find a way that we can be beneficial to the planet and still stay gainfully employed as designers. I think that that is a trend that we should all be pushing for. I really cannot think of a single reason that you should not at least try to implement some of these sustainable practices into your UI design. All right, so that was trend 4. We're going to move on to the final trend, which is visual trends, which I think everybody is the most excited about. All right, so what are the visual trends you'll see in 2023? Quick Google search had everything I've ever seen, from gradients that have been around for 10 years to minimalism, which all UI should employ, to some things that I think are legit possible visual trends. But this is my own personally curated wish list of maybe what we'll see in the coming year. So please don't hold me to these trends. They may not go anywhere. We're just going to focus on 3 here. So neo-brutalism, serifs, and immersive scrolling. I would like to mention, before I go and show you these, that a really good rule of thumb is to use 1 flashy trend design for every 2 tried and true traditional design elements. That helps make sure that your work doesn't seem too dated too quickly. So first we've got neo-brutalism. Experimentalism, I would say, is the #1 part of neo-brutalism. And I love that the Whitney Museum in New York actually kind of brought in the architectural style, because my next example for neo-brutalism will not have any of that kind of in it. So they kind of deconstructed the W of their name, essentially, and created this thing. And depending on what device you're on and what size your screen is, this actually changes angles and shapes all the time. And then they kept everything really clean, really strong typography would be a characteristic of neo-brutalism. Big photos, lots of white space or single colors. And so let's look at a few more here. So we've got this one here, which is called Workleets. I hope I'm saying that right. Again, really large, thick fonts, lots of lines, kind of garish colors, if I'm being completely honest. I love it. I think it's really fun. This one called Dad, giant fonts, big gradients and bright colors. I'm gonna go ahead and click on that one. Let's go ahead and see it in action, because it does some things as you're scrolling. So experimentation, like I said, that's a big part of this. Each page then loads and it gives us this idea. And so not only does this Dad agency seem to use it for their own branding, they seem to actually be doing it across the board. So that's definitely a trend that they're interested in. This Us by Night, bright kind of lavender purple color, really weird experimental type. And finally, this Delirium. This one is hilarious, so we're going to open this one up. So they're kind of leaning in on sort of Web 1.0, 90s aesthetic, which is also very popular right now. It's kind of an interesting way of melding brutalism or neo-brutalism with the 90s, which is also popular. So in a way, we've got kind of 2 trends going on. We're going to look at serifs. So serifs were the first type. They're almost 2,000 years old. They haven't had their day yet so much in digital sense. For a long time, our screens just didn't have the resolution necessary to display them well, and they just were kind of out of favor. But right now we've got way better screens, and people are wanting to do something a little bit more maybe sophisticated, classic, but they're also doing things that are not at all traditional with their serifs. I really like the way this festival has used this as an outline. And then they've overlaid this beautiful serif over these kind of monochromatic images. Puma is using it for one of their websites. And this is more of a slab serif, but it's got this really great contrast, the super, super thin and the really thick. And it's just not necessarily what you would expect from a sport company. And I think there's a lot of neat possibility for using serifs. And last but not least is immersive scrolling. I really don't know how to describe it without just showing you. This is a site that was made for Stanley Kubrick. It's called Kubrick.life. It's an immersive scrolling experience. As I scroll down, it doesn't feel like I'm going down a site the way that a normal website used to. It feels as though I'm kind of diving deeper in. And they've got this great historical footage, and they're talking about his 90th birthday and celebrating his life and telling us a little bit about him. And I'm still scrolling down the whole time. Now, that's the first time it's actually even looked like I was going anywhere. So they're doing that to kind of show the passage of time. I think that was a smart move in terms of design. And then if I keep scrolling, we're going to get to a moment here where it will go back into that more immersive example. So I'm still only scrolling down. That's the only thing I've been doing this whole time. But it's now opening up that big circle, bringing across this really cool, large headline, Paths of Glory. And that was one of his very first, or maybe the first film that he did. We learned a little bit about that, some of the posters, then we move into the next. And so this happens, this site goes on for 10 minutes. Just a really, really interesting way of navigating. I think it makes for a far more interesting web experience, and it is a trend that I hope we will see more of in 2023 and beyond. So that's it. That's our Trend 5 visuals. Why are they relevant? Well, they come and go, of course, but it's really important to be aware of and challenge yourself to try new things. I guess the risks, they could be too specific to a particular time and become dated quickly. And overuse becomes tiresome. Things like the Facebook kind of flat illustrations from a few years ago become so ubiquitous that I don't think that we even see them anymore. And so you want to be careful with the trends in overuse in that sense, and use what really speaks to you and feels appropriate to your specific project or client. And that was the last one. All of this knowledge now will help you stick out of the crowd and be a more well-rounded designer. UI design is so diverse though, I would love to hear what you would add to this list. Do you agree with my picks? If not, let me know in the comments why, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Also, if you're looking to start your own UI design journey, we offer a free short course that'll help you dip your toes into the industry and see if a career in UI design is right for you. If you're just starting out and are still a bit confused about what a UX and UI designer is, a while ago we released this amazing video with Dee explaining the differences and similarities and giving insight into each career. Check it out, and I'll see you next time.